Can you see me shaking? Hear the sound of my heart breaking. Hey guys, welcome back. So if you're new here, I'm Liz. This is Creating Crime Time, where I'm your host, and I sit down, I talk about a true crime case, and I create something at the same time. So if that piqued your interest, hit that red subscribe button down there, turn your bell notification on to all, that way you know whenever I upload. Let's get into today's true crime case. So today we are finishing up the case of Dean Corll. He ended off talking about Elmer, or Wayne as he went by, but I think Elmer is a more suiting name, so I'm gonna call him Elmer because that's his first name. So Elmer was talking to the police about all the crimes that Dean committed, and they're finding all these bodies, and they are going through Dean's van, and so when they brought Elmer to the boat shed, he took a step inside, and then his face turned into like a pale, grim, ashen face. He staggered around the door, and then right then, that's when the officer, Carl Siebeneicher, knew that they were going to find bodies there. That's the officer that brought Elmer there to search the boat shed on August 8th. So Elmer agreed to go with them, and he proceeded to show them where these bodies were. So like I've already stated in the last section, that they began digging and they found all these bodies. On the evening of August 8th, David Brooks goes to Houston Police Department with his father, and he gave a statement denying any involvement in any of the murders, and but he did admit to knowing that Dean had murdered and raped 2 youths in 1970. So the morning of August 9th rolls around, and Elmer gave a full written explanation statement detailing his participation and David's participation and involvement with Dean Corll and his procurement of youths and murders, abductions, all of the above. So in the confession, Elmer readily admitted to having personally killed about 9 of these men, and to have assisted Dean in strangulation of others. So he stated there's only 3 other abductions and murders that David had not assisted him and Dean with, and that was in the summer of 1973, because remember, that's when his fiance was pregnant. So that afternoon on August 9th, this is when Elmer goes to Lake Sam Rayburn, and where he and David and Dean buried 4 victims that were killed that exact year. So 2 additional bodies were found in a shallow lime-soaked grave that was located like really close to the road. And so when they went inside the cabin that the Corll family owned, police found the second plywood torture board and rolls of plastic sheeting and shovels and a sack of lime. So police altogether found 9 additional victims in the boat shed on August 9th. These bodies were recovered between 12:05 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. All were in an advanced state of decomposition. One of the bodies bore evidence of sexual mutilation. So the person's genitals were found in a sealed plastic bag beside the body. So their nether regions were taken off. Another victim had several fractured ribs. The 13th and 14th bodies unearthed had identification cards on them, and they were Donald and Jerry Waldrop, the brothers that went missing. So David would end up giving a full confession on the evening of August 9th, because there was no way he was getting around this, especially with Elmer already giving him up. There's no way. And he admitted to being present at the several killings and assisting in several of the burials, although he continued to deny any participation in the murders. So when they were talking about the torture boards, of which Dean restrained and tortured his victims, David said once they were on the board, now this is an exact quote that I have right in front of me, so I'm going to read it verbatim. Once they were on the board, they were as good as dead. It was all over, but the shouting and the crying. So he then agreed to accompany the police to High Island Beach and assist in the search of the bodies there. So on August 10th, 1973, Elmer again accompanied police to Lake Sam Rayburn, and this is when they found 2 more bodies that were buried just 10 feet apart. So, as with the 2 previously found bodies the day before, both of these victims were tortured and severely beaten, particularly around the head. So Elmer and David accompanied police to High Island Beach, and this is when they led them to the shallow graves of 2 victims. So on August 13th, both... Hold on a minute. I'm going to put the deep in the oven. Sorry about that. So, as I was saying, okay. So, on August 13th, this is when they go to High Island Beach. Sorry, there's a truck outside. So this is where they would find about 4 more bodies, and this makes a total of 27 known victims. So the worst, this is known as the worst killing spree in America at the time. Elmer initially insisted that there were 2 more bodies to be found inside the boat shed, and that the bodies of 2 more boys were buried at High Island Beach in 1972. So, at this time, this case was like the worst serial killer case known in the country, and the worst case of serial murder, like in the terms of number of victims and in the United States alone, and this exceeded the count that Juan Corona has, which is another serial killer I'll be covering. He was arrested in 1971 in California for the murder of 25 men. So Dean Corll surpassed him with killing count, basically. And for whoever like tries to comment down below and say that, no, it's H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes does not have a definitive exact count of how many he killed, corroborated ones, so that's why he does not count, okay? Okay? Anywho. And then, I mean, also there's John Wayne Gacy too, but he was only convicted of a certain amount of them. And so Dean's head count would be surpassed by John Wayne Gacy, who murdered 33 young boys and young men. So, and that was only like 5 years later. So literally these guys were killing at the same time and didn't even know it. They probably didn't. I wonder if they knew each other. Do you think that they knew each other? That's a possibility, because I mean they had very, very similar ways of killing. Then they were both in the food industry. So, oh, and they were both in the military. It's possible. So, yeah, And John Wayne Gacy also stated too that he was influenced by press coverage of the Houston mass murders when it came to like how he mutilated his victims and how he like got them prior to abuse and murder. So he was influenced by Dean Corll. So families of Dean's victims were highly critical of the Houston Police Department. They were like, the Houston Police Department were really quick to dismiss all these missing boys as being runaways and not to consider them as abducted or need any major investigation, which is still a common theme in the United States today. Like, there's still a lot of police departments that are just like, no, they just ran away. Yeah. Whether it's being lazy or they just don't care. I mean, it's probably all of the above, but that's my own opinion. Anywho. So family members of these boys complained that the Houston Police Department were so dismissive, and especially when these families were really adamant that these boys would never run away, especially Everett Waldrop. So this is Donald and Jerry's dad. He complained shortly after his sons disappeared in 1971, and he informed the police that an acquaintance had observed Dean burying what appeared to be bodies at the boat shed. So literally they had somebody that saw Dean burying what seemed to be bodies at the boat shed, and the cops completely dismissed it. They didn't even investigate it. So they could have nipped that all in the butt if they went after that lead, but nope, they didn't. Yeah. So Everett would also state that on one of his many occasions at going to Houston Police Department, that the police chief simply told him, "Why are you down here? You know your boys are runaways." Like, why the hell are you going to say that to a dad that has 2 missing boys when in retrospect they were killed? Like, granted, he didn't know that, but still. And then the mother of Gregory Winkle stated, "You don't run away from home with nothing but a bathing suit and 80 cents. That's what she said to the police department when they basically just dismissed her boy as a runaway. Like, so by May of 1974, 21 of Dean's victims were identified. And this was all but 4 of these boys had connections to living in Houston Heights. Like, they were all from the area. All of them. Yeah. 2 or more of the teenagers were identified in 1983 and 1985, one of whom was Richard Kepner, and then the other one was Willard Branch, who lived in Oak Forest. So, yeah, Elmer and David were indicted on different counts. So David was indicted on 1 count of murder, and Elmer was indicted on 3 counts of murder. Yeah, and this was on August 14th. So there was a grand jury that basically convened and heard all the evidence against them, and that's when they decided what indictments they should have. So they were tried separately. At first, David was only indicted on 1 murder. He ended up being indicted on 4 counts of murder, and Elmer ended up being indicted on 6 counts of murder. So they were tried separately, and Elmer went first. His trial started on the 1st of July in 1974. Even though he was charged with the murders between 1972 and July of 1973. So they go through the whole case. I mean, he knows he's guilty. They go over basically everything. The jury deliberated for 92 minutes, and then before they found Elmer guilty of all 6 charges of murder. Yeah, the following day is when he was sentenced to 99-year sentence consecutively for each guilty verdict. So that's 594 years in prison, and of which he was transferred to the Huntsville unit to formally begin his sentence. So he would appeal his sentence in conviction, and he was eventually awarded a retrial in 1978. So when he had his retrial, basically they tried everything that they could to defend that some of the evidence was just Dean's and not Elmer's. And unfortunately for him, after 2 hours of deliberation in June of 1979, they literally found him guilty, again convicted of 6 murders, and sentenced to 6 concurrent 99-year terms. So David's trial began in 1975, and so 2 years after confessions, he was indicted for 4 murders. Wow, that's a mouthful. And these were between December 1970 and June 1973. David's trial started in 1975. So basically with David, he was a little bit different than Elmer because, I mean, David was just really like bringing him his victims, and he wasn't really like involved in actual participation, but because he was helping him, technically he still is guilty as well. So the district attorney general, I have a quote from him, and this is pretty good. And his name is Tommy Dunn. He basically said he dismissed the defense contention for the case. At one point telling the jury, quoting right here, "This defendant was in on this killing, this murderous rampage from the very beginning. He tells you he was a cheerleader if nothing else. That's what he's telling you about his presence. You know he was in on it." Like, told the jury that, like, straight up. So needless to say, his trial only lasted a week. Jury deliberated for 90 minutes, and he was found guilty. He was found guilty of Lawrence's murder on March 4th of 1975, and he was sentenced to life in prison. So David showed no emotion when his sentence was passed down on him, although his wife burst into tears. David also tried to appeal his sentence, contending that the signed confession used against him were taken without him being informed of his legal rights, but his appeal was literally dismissed in 1979. So Elmer is serving a life sentence in the Mark W. Michael unit in Anderson County, Texas. He's had parole applications, and he's successfully filled out his parole applications dating from July 1980, and all of them have been denied. His next eligibility for parole will be in October of 2025. On the other hand, with David Brooks, he served his life sentence in the Terrell unit in Rocheron, Texas. Now, the way I just said that, served his life sentence. The reason being is because he actually died on May 28th of 2020 at the age of 65, and he actually died from COVID-19 related complications. So, basically, in the short term, Dean Corll's lackeys went to jail for his crimes. And yes, they are involved. Do I agree with their punishments? Yes, because they had an involvement. They procured these boys for Dean to rape and torture and kill. Do I believe David was really as involved? I don't really know. I think for him, this is a definite of a Munchausen by proxy because of him being sodomized by Dean at such a young age and being like taken under his wing. He literally was trained to be a puppet by Dean. So, but a lot of other people could think in a different way than I am. So it's not really like what I think. You know, it's hard. It's difficult. It's really difficult. Oh, man. But yeah, so that is the messed up case of Dean Corll. Severely messed up case of Dean Corll. I will say, too, that police did investigate a Polaroid picture that was found that was in the personal possessions of Elmer. This was in 2013 when they 2012, sorry, when they investigated this, and this picture was released to media. And this has been stored away since 1973. So the image depicts a blonde-haired teenage youth in handcuffs strapped to an undepicted device on Dean's floor, alongside a toolbox known to contain various instruments that Dean used to torture his victims. And the individual depicted has been ruled out by the Harris County Medical Examiner as being any of Dean's victims. And this included the unidentified victims. So Elmer himself stated that the picture must have been taken after he acquired the Polaroid camera in 1972, although he was adamant he had no idea who the boy was. Given that Elmer became acquainted with Dean in 1972, it's likely this boy was killed between 72 and 73. They also, during an investigation in 1975, they discovered a cache of pornographic pictures in films depicting boys as young as 8, most of whom were from Houston Heights. And of the 16 individuals depicted in the films and the photos, 11 of them appeared to be among Dean's victims, who have been identified at this point. And they believe... So, Elmer, when he said that this could have been in a part of a national sex ring, it's definitely a possibility, because, I mean, they found porn films and pictures with this stuff. And so the discovery of this individual, this individual pornographic films and photos were found in Houston in 1975, and they led to the arrest of 5 other individuals in Santa Clara, California. There's been no direct link in these two, Dean, but because it depicts the victims of his, that's a connection right there. And after this was brought into the news at this point, all of the families of these victims were like devastated to hear this, because it's just they're further bashing their loved one's memory by bringing up that their personal image was destroyed by being exploited by that. So, they did question Elmer and David in regards to knowing or meeting any of these individuals in the organization that Dean claimed he was involved with, but they never mentioned meeting them or being involved in any of it. Like, they just knew what they knew because they were helping him get young men. So in Santa Clara, however, it does indicate David stated that there was a young boy that was buried in California, and that was the earliest murder victim of Dean. And in Santa Clara, it does indicate that there's a possibility that the statements that David made in regards to that is true. So I have tried to look into that, but a lot of it is not like on here or on the internet. A lot of it's hush hush because, I mean, it's probably like privately investigated. So there's been many films about this. One of them is called Freak Out. It came out in 2003. Then there is one called In a Madman's World. That was in 2014. Let's see. There's a podcast called The Clown and the Candyman. That's been on since 2020. That is narrated by Jacqueline Bynon, and it's about the murders committed by Dean Corll and John Wayne Gacy, and the possibility of them networking through a sex trafficking network. So, and the ongoing efforts to identify all of their victims because they're not all identified. But yeah, that is the truly gruesome and messed up case of Dean Corll. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye, guys.
So that's aching, hoping I survive.